She walked into the consultation room, carrying something I did not expect. Not a folder of test results, not a list of symptoms written on a notepad. A canvas shopping bag from a grocery store. She placed it on the edge of my desk with quiet confidence, looked at me, and said, "Dr. Mercer, I made a decision 3 weeks ago that I need to tell you about. I stopped taking one of my blood pressure tablets. Not because I was being careless, because something changed. I want to be absolutely clear before I say anything else. Adjusting or discontinuing prescribed medication without medical supervision is not something I recommend, and it is not what I am suggesting here." But what happened when I pulled up her records stopped me completely. Her readings over the previous 3 weeks were the most stable and consistent I had seen from her in 7 years. Not just acceptable, better than they had been when she was on the full regimen. I looked inside the bag. 5 items, all food, nothing unusual, nothing that required a specialist referral or a trip to some obscure health shop. Just ordinary foods, chosen with intention, consumed consistently over months. She was 76 years old. "My name is Dr. Mercer. I have spent more than 2 decades working in cardiovascular medicine and preventive health. I have reviewed more patient histories than I can count. I have sat through more conversations about blood pressure management than I can number. And I will tell you without hesitation that the conversation I had that afternoon, leaning over a shopping bag, changed the way I approach every patient consultation I have had since. What I'm going to share with you today are 5 foods with the most compelling, most consistent, and most clinically relevant evidence for supporting healthy blood pressure in adults over the age of 60. Not supplements repackaged as superfoods. Not powders with misleading labels. Real, whole food that you can buy at a regular supermarket, prepare in a regular kitchen, and start eating tonight. The last food on this list is the one that genuinely surprises people every time. And the reason it works will completely shift the way you understand what is actually happening inside your arteries. Before we get to the foods themselves, I need to give you 2 minutes of biology. Because if you do not understand what is happening at the level of the blood vessel, these 5 foods will seem like an arbitrary list. Once you understand the mechanism, every one of them will make complete sense. Blood pressure is not simply a number on a monitor. It is a measure of force. Specifically, the force your heart must generate to move blood through the network of arteries and vessels that runs throughout your body. And that force is governed, more than almost anything else, by the condition of a structure that almost nobody talks about: the endothelium. The endothelium is the inner lining of your blood vessels. It is 1 cell layer thick. So thin, in fact, that you could stack 1,000 of those layers and struggle to see them with the naked eye. And yet this almost invisible tissue is arguably the most consequential structure in your entire cardiovascular system. When your endothelium is healthy and functioning well, it produces a molecule called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is, in essence, your body's own built-in mechanism for managing blood pressure. It sends a signal to the muscular walls surrounding your arteries, instructing them to relax, to expand, to widen. When those walls relax, the resistance against blood flow drops. When resistance drops, pressure drops. Naturally, quietly, without a single pharmaceutical compound. Here is where the problem begins. After 60, endothelial function declines. The cells become less efficient at producing nitric oxide. They grow more vulnerable to inflammation. Decades of dietary choices, oxidative stress, and hormonal shifts take their toll on that 1 cell thick lining. As it deteriorates, your arteries become progressively stiffer, narrower, and less responsive. Your heart senses the increased resistance and begins working harder to compensate. The readings on your monitor climb. Your physician adds another medication to the list, and the cycle continues. What most people are never told is this: the endothelium is not a fixed, unchangeable structure. It is responsive. It is dynamic. Under the right conditions, it is capable of measurable, meaningful recovery, even after 60, even after 70, even after decades of a diet that did not serve it well. Every food I am about to describe works primarily through the endothelium. Each one either supplies the raw materials your vessel lining needs to produce nitric oxide, reduces the inflammation that prevents it from doing so, or directly supports the relaxation and flexibility of the arterial wall itself. That is the central mechanism. Now that you understand it, everything that follows will land differently. Let us begin with the first food, and it is one that most people in this age group have either never tried or have not touched since childhood. Beetroot. When was the last time you actually ate a beet? If your honest answer is never, or not since I was a child, or I genuinely cannot remember, then you are leaving one of the most potent cardiovascular tools in the entire produce section completely unused. The clinical evidence behind beetroot is not based on tradition or folklore. It is some of the most rigorous nutritional cardiology research available. Beetroot is extraordinarily concentrated in a compound called dietary nitrate, not the synthetic nitrates found in processed meats, which carry their own separate concerns. Natural organic dietary nitrate, the kind the human body has evolved to process and use efficiently. When you eat beetroot, the bacteria that naturally live in your mouth begin converting that dietary nitrate into a compound called nitrite. Then, in the slightly acidic environment of your stomach, that nitrite is converted into nitric oxide. Read that sequence again carefully. You consumed a food, your body's own biology processed it through a chain of natural reactions. And the end product is the precise molecule that your aging endothelium is struggling to produce on its own. You gave your arteries a secondary source of the very compound they need most. A landmark study conducted at one of the United Kingdom's leading cardiology research institutions had participants with elevated blood pressure consume approximately 250 milliliters of beetroot juice daily, roughly 1 cup. Within 24 hours, systolic blood pressure dropped by an average of nearly 8 millimeters of mercury. After 4 weeks of consistent daily consumption, the reduction held steady. Endothelial function improved measurably. Arterial stiffness decreased. 8 millimeters in 24 hours from single cup of juice. That is the kind of result that makes cardiologists pay close attention. From a practical standpoint, beetroot juice is the most studied form, but whole roasted beets are excellent as well. Grate raw beets into salads. Blend them into smoothies with ginger and fresh apple, or roast them with a light drizzle of olive oil as a side dish with dinner. If the flavor feels too strong at first, mixing with carrot juice or a little citrus makes the earthiness much more approachable. One thing to know in advance: beetroot can temporarily color urine and stool pink or red. This is entirely harmless and has a specific name in medical literature. It simply startles people who are not expecting it, so consider yourself warned. The second food shifts the conversation from something people rarely eat to something most people think they already eat enough of, but almost certainly do not eat in the right form or quantity. Dark leafy greens. Spinach, kale, Swiss chard, collard greens. You have heard them recommended so many times the advice has likely faded into background noise. So let me offer you something specific, something that most people have genuinely never heard, that transforms leafy greens from a vague healthy eating cliché into a precise cardiovascular tool. Dark leafy greens are among the most concentrated dietary sources of magnesium available anywhere in the food supply. And magnesium's role in blood pressure regulation is one of the most consistently underappreciated stories in all of clinical medicine. Here is the mechanism. Every time a smooth muscle cell in the wall of your artery contracts or relaxes, that movement is controlled by the interplay between two minerals. Calcium drives contraction. Magnesium drives relaxation. When the balance is correct, your arterial walls cycle appropriately between tension and release, maintaining healthy, flexible tone throughout the day. When magnesium is deficient, and research suggests that somewhere between 60 and 70% of adults over 60 in developed countries carry some degree of magnesium insufficiency, that balance tips. The arterial muscles remain in a state of prolonged, low-grade contraction. More resistance, higher pressure, a heart working harder than it would need to if those vessels were allowed to relax. A comprehensive analysis published in a leading European clinical nutrition journal reviewed 34 separate studies covering nearly 2,500 patients and found that restoring magnesium levels reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 3 to 4 points and diastolic by 2 to 3. And those figures came from supplemental magnesium alone. Dietary magnesium, delivered inside whole food alongside its natural cofactors, appears to work with even greater efficiency. Here is the detail that matters most. Eating leafy greens occasionally is not enough to move the needle. You need approximately 2.5 to 3 cups of cooked leafy greens daily to meaningfully impact magnesium status. Raw greens have much higher volume, but a compound called oxalic acid interferes with mineral absorption. Brief cooking, a quick steam, or a light sauté breaks down that compound and makes the magnesium available. This is the difference between eating a salad and actually absorbing what your body needs from it. A patient of mine, a retired civil engineer in his late 60s, was confident he ate well. He had a large salad every single day for lunch, had done so for years. But his magnesium levels were persistently low. We added 2 cups of lightly wilted spinach to his dinner each evening. Just that one change. Within 6 weeks, his blood pressure readings had improved noticeably, and so had his sleep quality, which is closely tied to magnesium status. 2 cups of cooked greens at dinner. Not a dramatic overhaul. A single decision made tonight and then repeated. The third food is one that most people in the Western world encounter only as an occasional garnish or an expensive juice they walk past in the supermarket without picking up. Pomegranate. Before you think of it simply as a decorative fruit or a trendy beverage, let me show you what is happening at the molecular level inside your blood vessels when you consume it with consistency. Pomegranate contains one of the highest concentrations of a class of compounds called polyphenol found in any food that has been comprehensively studied in clinical research. Among these, a specific compound called punicalagin, found almost exclusively in pomegranate, has drawn decades of scientific attention for its remarkable bioavailability and potency. Researchers have spent considerable time and resources attempting to synthesize it as a pharmaceutical. The whole fruit still delivers it more effectively than anything produced in a laboratory. And now the fifth food, the one I promised would surprise you. Dark chocolate. Before you interpret this as the warm and permissive ending to a health video, the reassuring reward of the finish line, I want to walk you through the science carefully, because this is not a flourish. This is one of the most extensively studied cardiovascular foods in all of nutritional medicine, supported by more than 140 randomized controlled clinical trials. More trials, in fact, than many pharmaceutical compounds receive before regulatory approval. The active compounds in dark chocolate are a class of substances called cocoa flavonols, with a particular compound called epicatechin at the center of the research interest. And what epicatechin does to the endothelium is genuinely extraordinary. Earlier, I described the endothelium as a factory that produces nitric oxide. Beetroot, as we discussed, supplies the raw material that factory needs. Epicatechin does something different and complementary. It activates the specific enzyme inside the endothelial cell that is responsible for producing nitric oxide in the first place. It does not simply feed the factory. It switches the machinery on more fully. It makes your blood vessel lining more capable of producing its own protective, pressure-lowering molecule. A substantial analysis published in a major British medical journal reviewed 19 randomized controlled trials on cocoa flavanol consumption and found reductions in systolic blood pressure averaging 2 to 3 points and diastolic by 1 to 2. Those numbers may appear modest in isolation, but a sustained 2-point reduction in systolic blood pressure at a population level corresponds to a roughly 10% reduction in stroke mortality. Every consistent point matters. Here is the critical detail that most people get entirely wrong. The chocolate must be dark. Minimum 70% cocoa content. 85% or higher produces better results. Milk chocolate contains sufficient sugar and dairy to largely inactivate the flavonols, neutralizing any cardiovascular benefit. Chocolate processed through an alkaline method, sometimes labeled Dutch processed, destroys a significant percentage of the flavonols in production. You want minimally processed, high percentage dark chocolate. When you look at the ingredient label, cocoa or cacao should appear first. The dose used in research is between 10 and 20 grams daily. That is 2 to 3 small squares of a standard bar. This is not permission to eat chocolate freely. It is a specific, modest daily amount that delivers meaningful flavonol content without a meaningful calorie or sugar burden. One of the observations I find most rewarding in this work is the moment a patient realizes that the list of things worth eating is not simply a list of restrictions and sacrifices. 2 squares of 85% dark chocolate after dinner, not as an indulgence, but as a deliberate, evidence-based daily practice. The shift in how people relate to the idea of looking after their health, once they understand that it does not require deprivation, is something I have watched transform how consistently they follow through. Now, I want to say something that goes slightly beyond the science because I think it matters. Most people who spend years managing elevated blood pressure, who visit their doctors regularly, who take their medications faithfully and do everything they're asked to do, have never once had a conversation like the one we have just had. Not because their physicians are inattentive or indifferent. The doctors I know and have worked alongside care deeply about their patients. It is because the structure of the modern medical appointment is built around intervention, not education. A reading is taken. A number is elevated. A prescription is adjusted. 15 minutes have passed, and the next patient is waiting. Nobody has 45 minutes to walk through the biology of the endothelium, the ACE-inhibiting properties of a fruit, or the mechanism by which magnesium governs arterial tone V. That gap is real, and it has real consequences for real people who are doing everything they've been asked and still wondering why the numbers are not responding the way they hoped. The patient who walked in carrying that grocery bag had not been poorly managed. Her care had been attentive and appropriate. What she had never been given was this particular layer of information, the layer that connects what she placed on her dinner table to what was happening inside her arteries at the cellular level. Once she had that understanding, she acted on it, methodically, over months, and her body responded exactly the way the evidence said it would. That is what I want for you. Not a dramatic transformation in 2 weeks. Not the abandonment of anything your physician has prescribed. A gradual, consistent, informed shift in what you choose to eat. One that builds on itself over time, the way all meaningful biological change does, slowly and quietly, and then suddenly undeniably visible in the numbers. 5 foods, 5 distinct mechanisms, 1 unified goal. Beetroot, consumed several times a week working toward daily, supplying dietary nitrate that your body converts directly into nitric oxide, relaxing and widening your arterial walls within hours of eating it. 2 cups of cooked dark leafy greens daily, restoring the magnesium levels that govern the balance between arterial contraction and relaxation, allowing your vessel walls to release the sustained tension they have been holding. Half a fresh pomegranate or 150 milliliters of pure juice daily, with punicalagin working through the same pathway as a major class of blood pressure pharmaceuticals to reduce arterial constriction. 2 to 3 servings of sardines weekly, delivering the marine omega-3s that reduce arterial stiffness and directly support the flexibility and anti-inflammatory health of the vessel lining. And 10 to 20 grams of high-percentage dark chocolate daily, with epicatechin activating the enzyme inside your endothelial cells that produces the very molecule your blood vessels have been struggling to make enough of on their own. These 5 foods do not duplicate each other. They address 5 separate biological pathways simultaneously. Each one reinforces the others in a way that no single food or single medication can replicate working alone. Before you close this out, open a note on your phone and write down just one of these 5. The one that feels most accessible. The one that requires the least adjustment to how you already shop or cook. Not all 5 at once. Just one. This week, add it. Next week, add another. By the end of the month, all 5 are part of your routine, and you have not overhauled your life. You have simply made a series of small, specific, deliberate decisions until they became automatic. That is how every patient I have watched genuinely move their numbers has done it. not through a dramatic and unsustainable revolution, but through an accumulation of consistent choices that compound quietly over time. Blood pressure is called the silent condition for a reason, not because it is untreatable. It is among the most treatable and most responsive conditions in all of medicine. It earned that description because people tend to manage it passively, responding to readings at appointments, adjusting medications, never fully understanding what is happening inside their own arteries or what they genuinely have the power to influence at the level of the kitchen counter. The patient with the grocery bag broke that silence for herself. She asked questions. She read the research. She made 5 specific, consistent changes. And her arteries, which had spent years stiffening and narrowing, began slowly and measurably to respond. You now know what she knew. Your endothelium is not a fixed destination. It is living tissue. It is responsive. It changes in response to what you give it. Every meal is either a contribution toward better function or a step in the other direction. Tonight, you can make a different choice. Not a perfect one. Not an instant transformation. Just one different choice. Start there, and then come back and tell me how it went.